This story is usually used to calm people down, to reassure them, to explain suffering, to make pain feel justified. But that reading avoids the most disturbing part, because the book of Job is not about patience. It is not about reward. It is about what happens when suffering is allowed without explanation by the system that claims to govern the world wisely, and what that does to the human mind. Job does not begin as a rebel. He does not challenge authority. He does not question the structure of reality. He lives inside a worldview that promises coherence. Effort aligns with outcome. Virtue aligns with security. Order aligns with meaning. This is not blind faith. It is wisdom as a system. A belief that the world is morally legible, that actions lead to consequences, that justice is readable in results. And Job fits that system perfectly. He is described as blameless, respected, prosperous, not powerful in a political sense, but stable. And that matters. Because this story does not test a desperate man. It tests a man whose life makes sense. Then the structure collapses. Not gradually, not symbolically. Catastrophe arrives in clusters. Loss of property, loss of status, loss of children. Each event reported without explanation, as if the narrative itself refuses to justify what is happening. Job responds the way a psychologically integrated person would. He grieves. He accepts. He does not accuse. At first. Because at this stage, suffering still feels temporary, still explainable, still compatible with the system. But then something crucial happens. The suffering does not stop. And lingering pain is different from acute loss. Acute loss can be framed as tragedy. Lingering pain erodes structure. Job's body fails. His social standing dissolves. Even the language used to describe him changes. He is no longer blameless, he is struck, marked. This is where most interpretations become dishonest. They rush toward endurance, toward virtue, toward lessons. But the text does something far more dangerous. It reveals the machinery behind the suffering. Because this story does not begin on earth. It begins in a command center, a place of oversight, of evaluation, of cosmic administration. Job's life is discussed from above, not as a tragedy, as a case. A figure known as the accuser raises a question, not about Job's behavior, about the system itself. What if goodness is not genuine? What if virtue is just strategy? What if loyalty is purchased through reward? The challenge is not moral, it is structural. And the system allows the test, not because Job deserves it, but because the question is permitted. And that is where the story becomes unbearable. Because Job is not suffering due to failure. He is suffering because the system allows innocent suffering to defend its own logic. Job is never told this. From his perspective, the world simply stops making sense. This is why his breakdown matters. By chapter 3, Job does not curse God. He curses existence itself. He curses the day coherence began. Because the human mind can survive almost anything, except randomness that claims to be moral. If suffering is chaos, it can be endured. If suffering is punishment, it can be negotiated. But if suffering is judgment without cause, it becomes corrosive. Job's friends arrive, and this is where the story becomes psychologically precise. They do not come to comfort. They come to stabilize the system. They insist suffering must mean guilt, because if Job is innocent, then the moral order collapses. Their arguments grow longer, more refined, more abstract. For 34 chapters, explanation becomes pressure. At that point, explanation stops being help. It becomes violence. Language used not to understand suffering, but to protect the worldview that requires it. This is the real conflict of the book, not faith versus doubt, but experience versus system. Eventually, Job demands an explanation from the authority itself, and the response comes, not with comfort, not with apology, but with scale. Job is shown a world too complex to moralize, forces that do not exist for human fairness, creatures that are dangerous but not evil, systems that operate without human permission. This is not an answer. It is a reframing. The message is not, "You are wrong." The message is, "You are not central." Job stops demanding explanation, not because he receives one, but because he realizes none is coming. Not as punishment, as reality. This is often mistaken for humility, but psychologically, it is something else. It is the collapse of the assumption that meaning must be intelligible to be real. In the end, Job's life is restored. But restoration does not undo knowledge. Replacement does not erase loss. Job has seen something, that coherence is conditional, that virtue is not insurance, that explanation is not guaranteed. The story never tells us what Job believes afterward. That silence matters. Because once a person has lived without explanation, they never fully return. This is why the book of Job is still dangerous. Because it suggests something most systems cannot tolerate, that suffering can exist without cause, without lesson, without moral accounting, and that wisdom is not control. It is living without guarantees. Every ideology that insists pain must be deserved is arguing against Job. Every institution that explains suffering instead of confronting it is repeating the mistake of Job's friends. The story does not comfort the suffering. It destabilizes the secure. And once you accept that explanation is not promised, you stop asking who deserves what, and start asking a more unsettling question. What holds you together when the system that shaped your meaning refuses to explain your pain?